Yo Wixus, Nuquam Khanalas, Kaisalach, Mamptigilla to Quagils to Numkis. My name is Khanalas or Makwala, but you can use Dakota if those names are too hard to use. I come from the Mamptigillas and the Quagils and the Numkis tribes of the Kwakwaka'wakw Nation. Coming here from Alert Bay, very small island, and I'm here with Julius, and we're going to talk about wolves today. So, over to you, Julius.
Thank you. Yeah, that's going to be a lot of fun, I think. I've been looking forward to this one, and I think probably a lot of people also enjoy wolves, and so this is going to be. Yes. Yeah, they're popular for better or for worse in some ways, because unfortunately, I guess they've been vilified a lot in culture and history, especially in European culture, actually. And that's a problem. And we need to still overcome that, because you still have a tendency for them to be seen as dangerous, the big bad wolf sort of thing, right? And that's not how they are.
Yeah. Little Red Riding Hood, werewolves.
Right.
I was reading up earlier and found out that there was werewolf trials, kind of like the witch trials.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, people were persecuted for being werewolves.
That's wild. But that's it, exactly. They've been seen that way. Oh yeah, and by the way, I should say again, my name is Julius. I didn't introduce. Well, you introduced me actually. I come from right now. I'm coming to you from Vancouver, which is on the Musqueam, Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh nations territory. And it's just a huge pleasure to be here as always with the Sierra Club BC drawing webinars. So yeah, absolutely, wolves. We'd like to be able to help set to help to set the record straight about how they really are, and they are fascinating animals. They are the direct ancestors of our dogs, and so anybody who's got pups, I've got a couple of pups here in the house. We can just see those wonderful resemblances and see how they descended from these amazing animals who are still around. And wolves are very diverse. They have been especially diverse. In the past, they were even more diverse, but unfortunately, there's been a lot of hunting of them around the world, and that diversity, that gene pool, has really trickled down to a narrow bit, except in some areas. And on the coast in BC here, we have some absolutely amazing wolves that have a higher genetic diversity. They are much more diverse. And we have a really special kind of a population of wolves, these coastal wolves, that are different in their way of life from most other wolves in the world, in that they are effectively a marine mammal. Some people consider them to be a marine mammal, kind of like polar bears, which spend a huge amount of life in the water. And these wolves also will swim between islands on our coast, huge, like several kilometers through the water, just with their nose and ears and the top of their head out of the water, very stealthily. They eat large amounts of fish and seal, and also even like shellfish on the shore. They'll dig them up with their paws. They rely on the ocean for so much of their food, and they're a wonderful species to talk about when we're talking about bridging different communities, because wolves are super important for bringing that the fish, the biomass of the fish, the flesh of the fish, the nitrogen and the phosphorus from the fish's body onto land, to help to add nutrients that support the growth of these amazing ancient forests, these rainforests on our coasts here in BC and throughout at least that part of the rainforest. And so the wolves are helping the rainforest to be able to support everything that lives in the rainforest, including the wolves. So it's a wonderful cycle of life.
It's interesting you're talking about people referring to them as marine mammals, because it's down the Salish people talk about the wolf coming from the sea, and it being the cousin of the whale. So in many ways, that's what the Salish their stories tell them. So in many ways, it is a marine mammal, For sure, for sure.
That's actually really neat, actually, and it makes a lot of sense that these stories probably would have come from observations of how much time the wolves spent in the water. That is really interesting, actually.
Yeah, they call it Takaya down there.
Okay.
Up here we call it, well, actually, the Musqueam Zaudanuk, who they're the only Kwakwaka'wakw tribe with the wolf origin story, but they call it Uligan. And but over here in our Bay of the Nipkiss, we say Atla Num. So interesting little tidbit, but yeah, the Musqueam believe that they came from four brother wolves, and they have their own little story. I can't I wouldn't begin to start that story.
I love how much diversity there is in the ways in which, you know, the different peoples have seen these wolves, and of course you have a whole bunch of languages, and most of us are unfortunately not as familiar with the diversity of languages and cultures that have existed for thousands and thousands of years on these coasts here. And I think that we would all, especially those of us like me from a European background, would benefit ourselves a lot to learn more about this. It's an enormously wonderful, rich history of people having lived here for thousands of years in close connection with and in a sustainable way with all of this wonderful wildlife. And so we are very grateful to still be able to have this wildlife here because of the way in which the people who stewarded this land basically kept it in such a great contact with it. And so let's talk about these fascinating wolves now, the coastal wolf. I'm going to share my screen here, and we're going to learn to draw these coastal wolves. And actually, really quickly, I just wanted to share where are we here? Share a quick little couple of images. Let me see if I can find it. It was there. Zoom is doing an interesting little thing for me here now. It's not making something available, but that's okay. No, okay. That's okay. That's all right. No worries. I was gonna show an image. Actually, you know what? I can just share the screen as it is. Oh, here it is. Okay. Bit of a technical difficulty there, but this actually is, let me just go. Okay. There we go. Okay, so these are paintings that I did a while ago for some wonderful collaborators in paleontology, actually, and all organized by Dr. Grant Zazula, who is the Yukon paleontologist in the Yukon. And it just shows how wolves in the deep past, many thousands of years ago, were living with a lot of big animals around them. Mammoths, also caribou and horses were around in large numbers then, as well as other things like moose and various other kinds of things. And then, of course, some of those died out, mammoths and the horses. The horses were a big part of their diet. And so when those died out, they had to switch to other types of food. And of course, now we have them hunting moose and so on. But some wolves also relied largely in some areas on fish. And a close investigation of their remains, like this one here, which I painted for them, depicting this little wolf cub that was found preserved frozen in its den. Close examination of its remains showed that the elements that made it up suggested that it had a large component of fish in its diet. This was like 57,000 years ago. And so this was Beringian wolves. It's a different group of wolves than are alive today. They lived in ice-free areas of the far north. But like the coastal wolves of today, they also had a larger component of fish in their diet. Here's little Jure with his mom hunting, you know, a picture of hunting salmon, for example, in a stream. So really interesting connection to the past that wolves have in the past as well, also relied heavily on fish in some areas. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to draw a modern wolf, a modern group of wolves that do rely heavily on fish in their diet. And so this is kind of a preview of what we're going to end up with today with our drawing. And don't worry if it's a little fast or whatever. This is recorded, so you can always go back to it if you wanted to add to your drawing. We're going to go through it and discuss the really neat aspects of the biology and the cultural history of these animals and what we can do to help to protect them. So this is kind of the preview. I'm going to switch now to the drawing mode. Now, I have set this up. I'm doing this digitally with a stylus and a tablet, but you can do it on paper or whatever way you like. I've set this up to be 8.5 inches by 11 inches in size, like a letter size sheet. And I'll want you to pay attention to two things: where you draw on the paper, and I'll show you how to mark it. And secondly, I'll tell you sometimes that you want to make the next lines very lightly, because we want most of the lines we draw to be nice and heavy so you can see them clearly. But we're also going to draw some sort of guide lines that we don't want to really show up in the end, but they'll just help us to put things in the right places. I'll let you know when that happens. Okay, so let's start. I'm going to turn off the preview, and we are going to start by drawing this wolf. So coastal wolves are members of what we call a genetically distinct group of wolves. Their genes, their chromosomes, what makes them them at the very basic level of their cells is a little different from other wolves on this continent. And that means that they've been separate from other wolves for a very long time, thousands of years, and they look a little different too. And I'll highlight these differences as we go. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to draw this wolf, the front end of this wolf, the head. So the first thing we want to do before we put anything on the paper is, you see what I've done here is indicated where you want to kind of put your wolf's snout, the nose. The tip of the nose should be sort of nearer to the lower left side of your page. And if you can, kind of mark out about 1/4 of the way in from the left side of your page and about 1/3 of the way up. If you wanted to mark these easily, you can fold your paper in half twice, and then that gives you quarters. And if you wanted to do sort of like the thirds, you can fold it like if you're putting it in an envelope. You don't have to. You can sort of just judge by eye, and it'll be close enough. If a little bit of the tail hangs off, it's not a big deal. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. And the first thing we want to do is draw the head of the wolf, sort of the outline of the face. I'm going to do that. You're going to start near where these two lines join, just a little bit up from that. And that's the snout of the wolf, the nose. And actually, I'm going to bring this up to full. And you're going to go in this sort of a curvy-ish line, a little bit like that. What you have here is, there's the tip of the nose. And this is the forehead up here. And there's the nose. You don't have to write those down. And then from the nose, we're going to make this little curvy line on the underside of its snout, back that far. Okay? So that's kind of like if you were looking at its head kind of from the side, if you kind of were to shine a light and make a shadow, that's kind of the shape of the shadow would appear behind the wolf's face. So the next thing we're going to do, and we're going to keep adding parts, we want to put the neck in place. So what we're doing first is kind of drawing out the overall shape of the body, and then we'll add details. And we can kind of keep the proportions right. The neck of the wolf, we're going to start from, and I'm starting from a little behind where we left off at the top of the head, because we're leaving space for the ear on that side, okay? So just a little bit back, and you can make this line a wee bit squiggly because it's got fur, right? These wolves have a relatively shortish fur in the summer, and then as the summer and the fall progress, that fur gets longer and longer as it grows in preparation for winter, when they have a bushier coat. During the winter, they're kept warmer by this longer fur, and then it sheds in the spring again, If you have dogs, and some kind of dogs shed really a lot, you can tell what it's like when there's fur coming off them, right? Right now, we're kind of picturing this at sort of an in-between time. For the bottom of the neck, go to where you left off at the bottom of the head, and just kind of make this slightly squiggly line a little bit up and to the right like that. That's the bottom of the neck. And now we're going to go to the back. So there's the shoulders right behind the top of the neck. And then we're going to go along the back, which kind of has a little bit of a dip in it. And then the sort of the rump or the butt of the wolf, just above where the tail would join. Do that. Just get this layer. And we're just going to continue from where you left off with the neck. And just make this line that kind of goes a slight curve like this. And then kind of give it a little bit of a rounded top to its butt. You know, a lot of doggies, our doggies, love to get scratched right above their tail. That sort of rounded part of the top of their hind legs, right around the top of their butt. They love that. And so we're looking at that part of the wolf where a lot of doggies, for example, a lot of their descendants like to get attention and get scratchies. So yeah, you can't tell I like dogs and wolves and all wildlife. Anyway, yeah, I totally love our doggies. We're going to draw the belly next. And the belly, we're going to leave a little bit of space behind the end of the bottom of the neck for the legs, the front legs. And then we're going to make this little, again, sort of squiggly line. There's more fur down here, going a little bit like that, see? The fur kind of, it comes down and hangs down a bit from their chest and most of their belly. Of course, if you go far enough back, there's an area, like with a lot of dogs, that has less hair just under their hind legs. And so this is good for cooling off. They can rest, and you've probably seen your doggy rest on cooler surfaces in the hot of the summer. And this is a great way for them to transfer heat. And for wolves that live in the water, you know, this is an area where there would be a lot of heat lost, for example. But they can control it by how much they open up their legs. So it's kind of a neat, like an air conditioning system built in for them. But there's a lot of fur underneath them typically. You'll see it hanging down like that. Okay, so as we're fleshing out the overall shape of this wolf, we're going to add the sort of left front leg. And that one, we're going to, where that space where we left between the neck and the belly, we're going to draw this line coming down. This. So you can see there's a wee bit of a curve, not much. That's the front part of the forearm, kind of like it's the equivalent of our arms. And then at the back and of where the belly begins, we'll draw the back end of the leg. It comes down like this, and just about that far. Now, I haven't put the paws in place yet. We'll deal with that afterward because there's a little bit of detail there. We just kind of want to give the overall shape first. Now, that's the part of the leg that sticks out of the wolf from below its belly. Of course, you remember that where that leg joins the body, that's where its elbow is actually. And if you were to draw a little bit of the leg above that, where it joins into the body, this is just kind of lightly draw these kind of like the dotted lines. Because there's that shoulder area too, right? It comes above sort of the upper arm, and then there's the shoulder above that. And then the front as well, you got little dotted lines that kind of come up like this. And it's really mostly, you can see the way that the fur curves in those areas. And that's how you see where the leg is outlined, kind of. And there's also a little bit of dotted lines here to show some of the muscles, because these kind of bulge, these animals are really powerful, beautiful animals. The coastal wolf differs a little bit from other wolves in how it looks, as I mentioned. And one of the ways is that its head is a little bit smaller, for example, compared to its body than that of other wolves. And as we get later on to describe the fur, it's also a little bit more red in color, kind of a more rusty color than most wolves are. And that makes a lot of sense because of where it lives. A lot of these shorelines are covered in beautiful growths of kelp. And in particular, there's a kind of kelp relative called, the genus name, the scientific Latin name is fucus. And it's a beautiful little branched, it looks like a plant. It's not a plant, but it's kind of a ancient relative of many different kinds of organisms or life forms that use sunlight. And it just covers the shores. And this has sort of an olive color, but when it's been exposed, sometimes it can develop more of a brown color because it lives between the upper and lower, high and low tide marks sometimes. And so when it's been in the air for a while, it often looks browner. And these wolves, when they are hanging out on the shore, they can blend in better with these sort of brownish colored seaweeds or kelp on the shore and hide better, so they can sneak up on their prey. So it's kind of a neat idea of how they're colored and why this kind of helps them in their way of life. Okay? So that, by the way, that was the front leg on our side. And then we're going to do the back leg. There's going to be some nice curves in the back leg because of the way that the muscles and the bones interact together. We get this beautiful, powerful leg that allows them to run really fast by pushing off behind. So the first thing we're going to do is draw the front, or actually, we're going to draw the back of the leg first, actually. So you go up to the top of the rump of the wolf where you left off, and you can continue down in a sort of a curved line toward that red line that we drew. Curves inward, and then it changes direction down here, and then we get to the ankle, and then there's sort of a sharper change in direction down to here. Okay, so wolves are different from us in how they walk. With their back legs, which are the equivalent of our legs, they don't put, like, we have our whole foot on the ground, and our ankle, our heel touches the ground, right? And the ankle is right above that. Wolves are different. If you imagine you're walking on the balls of your feet so that only your toes and the balls of your feet are touching and that your heel is off the ground, well, that's how they walk. And most other mammals walk this way, where this area right here basically is kind of like the heel. Okay, and then the front of the leg will start again where we left off at the belly, and there's a bit of a curve like this, and it just gives you a little bit of extra space between the back of the leg and the front, so you have a pretty close to same thickness of the leg going down from where we started, but you'll see that that curve there, where opposite of the heel, is smoother. Okay, so there's some tendons there that help to connect powerful muscles to the bones, and those ones kind of smooth out the shape of the front of this part of the leg. Okay. And now the last part of the main sort of part of the body, and for this actually I'm going to move this little note that I made here, and we're going to add a tail, right? So that we have the full size and shape, overall shape of the wolf. We're going to go like this from the bottom, or sorry, from the back end, the furthest back end of the wolf. You'll kind of drop this kind of a very kind of bushy looking line, I guess you could say, and then it curves back toward the heel, and then goes back up and meets sort of halfway down the top part of the back leg. They have a bushy tail, right? There's a lot of dogs with really, really short little fur on their tails. Well, wolves are not like that. They have a nice bushy tail, and these tails are good for all sorts of things. Part of it is for balance when they're running and moving. Part of it is for communication. So you can see when your dogs wag their tails, dogs and canids in general, this group of animals, they communicate with their tails a lot because wolves are social animals, and that's important for them to communicate with others of their family. They live in family groups. And so it's important for them to be able to say to each other how they're feeling, for example, whether they're happy or not. And their tails are a big part of this. And then so we've got that now. And we're going to switch over to the front of the wolf now. Actually, I'm just going to get a couple of lines here at the front of the hind leg, above the belly, where it joins. You can draw a little dotted line here, basically, kind of where the front of the leg would go. And again, this is kind of shown by the way that the fur bends. You can see these kinds of lines that show where the edge of the leg is. And again, if you wanted to add, there's a couple of little dotted lines here that show some of the muscles in the leg. Again, very powerful legs. They are powerful not only to be able to run, but because these are the coastal wolves, they also use these legs really a lot for swimming, right? So they need to be able to swim several kilometers sometimes. Makwala, there was you're familiar too maybe with this story of this particular wolf that was actually named after one of the languages that meant wolf. That I don't know if you wanted to share something about that was on Discovery Island.
Yeah, I remember something about that a couple of years back. It's a little faded from my memory, but yeah, it was kind of a significant thing to have that wolf there on that island. Takaya, yeah, it was named Takaya.
Oh, yes, exactly, Takaya.
Is the Salish word for it, which is, I mean, that's the area it was in, and that's good. And animals, they swim, like miles to get to places. Like my little island, we have no deer, no bears, but every once in a while we got a little family of deer going around making a mess in people's gardens. And, there's a bear last year, I think, that was here for a bit. But yeah, I thought it would be interesting to talk about, I think the reasons why wolves were going extinct. And it seems like a pattern of, like, for instance, in Ireland, it was like people protecting their sheep and stuff like that, and trying to, like, in many ways, master nature to fit their needs. And so that's when I think they killed off all the wolves in Ireland in like 1700s or something. And then again, here around like 1915, that's when the U.S. government, obviously we're in Canada, but the U.S. government started the wolf eradication program, and started killing. Yeah, most of them were killed off by the 1950s, and again, that's to save the I guess colonial agriculture. And
right.
Like imposing yourselves in an area where things have been going well for so long. And I don't want to be pan-indigenous, but I'm pretty sure a lot of indigenous peoples had a lot of respect for wolves, and well, I know the coastal peoples here did. The Salish have their stories, and I know we have ours for the Muskamau, Zaudenach, and Kinkum Inlet. So it's about not being above nature, I think, and being a part of it. And I think that's humans. We think we have grandiose ideas about ourselves because of our intellect and the technology we can build, but we're still a part of nature, and we still affect nature, and it can be good or for worse, right? So
absolutely. I think
I just thought we're talking about the wolf, and so I thought it was important to talk about why we're talking about the wolf. Seeing these beautiful creatures when you're able to, going out camping and stuff like that, and you get to see them mosey on out to the shoreline in the early hours of the morning is quite a unique experience, because they're not dangerous. Well, they can be dangerous, but most of my wildlife encounters have been good. It's just about being respectful when you enter an area. So yeah.
I think that's an excellent message that I think a lot of us need to learn, is that the way that we see animals is shaped by how we interact with them. You were mentioning they don't choose to be dangerous for the vast majority of time. Yeah, sure, they have the means, they have teeth and so on, but if, as you have seen, and as many others have seen who have interacted closely with them, these are intelligent animals that they're social. They don't want to interact negatively if they can help it. It costs them energy too, and we have to understand that animals aren't out there to get us. There's very rarely have a situation where, especially with things like wolves, and we see that with a lot of other species here as well, they just want to mind their own business, and we, as you said, we need to respect them. And when we respect them, we see a completely different story than kind of like the myths and fables that have been made around them. And I love to see them this way. And I really love the way that so many people have in the past in North America here lived with these animals in close association, in harmony. And that's kind of, that's my dream for what the world I'd love to live in. Because the kinds of things you see are spectacular. It is so wonderfully rewarding. So yeah, absolutely, I agree that's something that I fully share. That's my hope for the world in the future, and we can learn a lot. But yeah, unfortunately, they're not always treated well by a lot of groups of people. And so yeah, it's very important for us to do what we can to advocate for them being treated reasonably. The wolf that you were talking about, Takaya, the one that was on Discovery Island, is like 4 kilometers away from downtown Victoria now. It swam a long way. There might have been a couple of islands in between, but it's huge distances, and it lived there for like 7 years, I think. And a photographer, I think Cheryl Anderson, had done a beautiful story on Takaya, and you know, was in relatively close to him, and could see how this lone wolf was living by itself, aside from other wolves as well, on this island that was free of deer. So it was relying fully on like marine animals, like from the water. So again, it's really interesting how they can just change their behavior to suit their needs and what's available around them. So wolves are spectacular that way. So yes,
yeah, adaptability, right? And that's, I think, something that humans have kind of lost. You know, we have convenience, right?
Yeah.
You know, we can get avocados all year long in a place that can't grow avocados. And so, you know, again, like, learning to adapt is something that, yeah, we need to really look towards the animal kingdom to relearn some tricks we may have jaded ourselves to with our technology.
Very much so. We instead of shipping things from far away, you know, we can avoid that, and therefore not incur the huge amount of airplane fuel that is burned, that makes a lot more greenhouse gases in the atmosphere to be released, which causes our climate to destabilize, which warms further. And that warming affects the wolves here as well on the coast, because you've seen lately, the last few years, there have been some intense heat waves on the coast here and many other places too. And that affects the marine life, the life that is coming, that is a crucial part of the food of these wolves, can be up to 85%. Like, you know, what about 7/8 of their food can be from the ocean. And as the climate warms, the kinds of animals they rely on for food arrive at different times. So that means that they have to change their life, and sometimes that can cause them to or in the future, I would imagine it could cause some serious disruptions, and not too far in the future, for when they have access to food. And of course, then you could have reduced numbers of wolves because they can't get the food they need at the times that they need it. You know, they have pups at certain times of the year, for example. This is all very closely connected, the timing of various events in these systems. And so we have to think in the biggest picture possible. Let's protect the planet as a whole, because each of the component communities depend on that. And let's protect the individual communities as well. They need old growth, ancient forests. So we need to protect areas from logging, from the removal of these ancient forests, because these wolves use those big trees, the bases of the trees, to dig their dens underneath the roots. You need big roots for that. They use these forests very, very inherently for their lives, for every aspect of their lives. And so we need to work on many ways to protect them that way.
Indeed. I mean, the old growth forests are so important too, and keeping cool in the summer months as well. And you know, you look at the tree farms, and they're not suitable for animals to. A bear can't walk through those, you know, like, so where's it going to go, you know? And then we get mad when they come into the town, and we tranquilize them if they're lucky, and then bring them back to an area. Where are they going to go after that? left.
Exactly. And then you have these, yeah, exactly, the wildlife encounters with humans, and that's where some people have negative stories to share about that, because of course they're looking for food, and sometimes that interferes with our lives if they're too close together. And we have, you know, ways of storing our food that you know, make it possible for us to interact with them in more negative ways. So yeah, the biggest threats to these wolves include, for example, deforestation, clear cutting of forests, and climate change is a big one as well. And hunting as well is another one, because these wolves don't have special protection as a particular group of wolves yet. And so they're treated as every other wolf. And wolves as a whole in North America aren't too badly off. So there's lots of availability for hunting licenses. And unfortunately, these wolves on the coast here suffer the same fate, but they aren't given any special protection, even though they are a very special group of wolves. So there's another area where we could, you know, write letters to our policymakers and ask for more specific protection, for example. Anyway, I'm going to go back to the drawing as well. We have these interesting conversations in between. There's so much to learn about these wonderful animals. So now get your fingers all ready, and we're going to add some details to this wolf. It can't hear anything yet because it's got no ears, right? So let's put some ears on the wolf. This should be kind of fun, because the first one we're going to start with is the right ear, the one that is on the far side of the wolf. And this is kind of what you would see again if you would shine a light at the wolf and make a sort of a shadow against the background. You would see this ear's shadow. So we're going to start where the back of the head starts, and we're going to make this little line that comes up and curves back down, kind of like a rounded triangle. The outline of its ear. This wolf is like other relatives of wolves. They have these wonderfully mobile ears. They are spectacularly sensitive to sound, and they can move them independently of each other, as you've seen with your dogs. Wolves can do this as well. So this one ear on the right side is turned a little bit to the side. It's listening to sounds that are happening in the forest behind it. The other ear is on our side, and I'm going to show you how to draw that, because it's always tricky to draw the eyes and ears of wolves from different angles, for example. So we're going to go through that. And that one is actually pointed forward, listening to what's happening in front of it. And we're going to show what's in front of it, because it's kind of hunting in the water, like a coastal wolf would do often for salmon. So we're going to, now, as I mentioned, we want to draw the next lines lightly. This is going to be a guide kind of a line. And to show that, I'm switching to red color for this, so that it's easy for you to tell it apart. I'm going to draw a couple of lines that show us where to put the ear. It's kind of a quick and dirty way to be able to do that. So here we go. The first one, look at the ear that you drew, the right ear. Go to the very corner at the lower front corner. You're going to start there, and you're going to draw a line that I'm going to show you where it ends. It ends at the corner where the front of the leg joins the body. So those two little X's. You don't have to draw the X's, but that's kind of where we're going to draw a line between those two, lightly, like that. Again, I'm doing this in red because this line shouldn't really show up in the end, so you want to do it lightly. The other line we're going to draw is going to start, and I'm going to put another X here, at the point where the forehead begins, just above the snout. And it's going to end up at the front of the shoulder, basically. Like that. So we're going to draw a line between those. Okay, again, a light line. So now we have this kind of where these two lines meet. That's going to be useful for us as sort of an anchor point, so that we can draw the ear. Now I'm going to go back to actually making heavier lines, because we're going to draw the ear. And for that, because we've made these lines, it's easier for us not to put the ear in the wrong place. We're going to go very close to where those two lines join, just a little bit to the up top and a little bit to the right and above. We're going to draw this, again, a triangle. Back down like this. Kind of a triangle, but only one line. It doesn't have a base, it doesn't have a bottom. We're also going to draw another little line, because that's the front edge of the ear, right? It's tall ears. Now we're gonna we can see a little bit of the back end of the ear as well, because these ears are kind of like, if you cup your hand, right? The what we just drew was like the edge of the front of your hand here, but there's also this area behind where it's kind of bulging out. And we can see that a little bit as well. So we're going to draw this little line behind it like this to show that it's curved. And it's curved because that shape is really good for if there's sound waves coming in, the sound waves bounce off the ear, and because it's curved, it focuses the waves down into the ear, and then it's transmitted to where the wolves. It's kind of like what we have ear bones that help to that vibrate, and then that vibration gets transmitted to the brain and recorded as sound. And so you need those sound waves to be focused properly, and the shape of their ears are really good for focusing the sound into where they actually sense the sound in their head. And so that's why we have these interesting shapes of ears. Bats are wonderful that way because you can see their ears are super developed for this because they actually effectively see with their ears, like with sonar. So that's a whole other thing. But wolves can't, hear in that kind of detail, but they are really, really sensitive to sound. And this is part of why. There's also, we're going to put a little bit of detail inside the ear. Now the ears, you see it with a lot of dogs, for example, too. They have these really lot of hairs, fluffy hairs inside the front of their ears. And that's what's happening here with these wolves as well. This ear is pointed forward and downward so we can see the front of the ear. Okay? So we're going to be able to put these long hairs, kind of, how to describe this? There's kind of a line in the center of the ear. Make a little shaded area that goes up like that. That's kind of where it's more of a gap. And then there are these long hairs that go from the outside pointing inward like that, from both directions. See? Kind of like two combs almost meeting. And so those ear hairs partly help to reduce the the entrance of dust or maybe other insects or whatever into the ear. They catch them before they enter. It's kind of a filtering system partly, and there are other reasons for it as well, but that's one important thing that ear hairs can function as. Okay, so that's our ears. Now we've put them in the right place. I'm actually going to remove these lines that we drew here for now, I think. Well, you know what? I'll leave it there for now. It's okay. Now we want to put the eyes in. And again, eyes are always a tricky thing to be able to put into an animal, to draw into an animal that is not right from the side, right? Because then the eyes change in position on the head as the head rotates. And we have a wolf that's kind of rotating its head a little bit toward us, but mostly from the side. So where do we put the eyes? Well, we're going to do that trick again using a couple of guidelines. Okay, so again, for this part, draw lightly, and we're going to put these lines in place that help us to determine where we're going to put the eyes. Okay, so I'm going to switch to red again. And that first spot that we already had, the point where the snout joins the forehead, that X, we're going to use that again. It's this one. Okay. The other point we're going to use, I'm going to put a little X there, is at the bottom corner of the close ear. We're going to draw a line to connect those 2 points, lightly again. Okay? And then we're going to draw one more line. And this line is going to start from where we started the very first line for the ear, at the corner, the front corner of the far ear right there. And use that same X. And now we're going to go and make another X at the bottom, underneath the chin, or underneath just where the neck begins, right here. Straight down from the close ear is another way to think of it. You're going to draw a line, a light line again, between those, connecting them. So now we have, again, another sort of place where these 2 lines join. That's what we're going to use to draw the eye. And actually, I just put these on the, it's okay. I'm just going to shift these over. I put these on the wrong layer, but that's all right. No big deal. I can fix this, like that. And then we are going to use those 2 lines that we just drew. And we are going to shift this over. And we're going to draw the eye. Now, the eye is located right at the place where those 2 lines met. That's the center of the eye. That's where its pupil would be, the dark spot through which light actually enters the eye. And we're going to actually draw the eye, and it's kind of a little bit like a lemon shape, but with corners. So I'll show you what I mean. It kind of, oops, I am still in red color, so let's shift to black for this. Now for here, of course, you can make heavier lines. The eye itself is kind of round, but around the eye, there's a bit of dark coloration. Whoops, sorry, that was a little bit, my computer kind of made a mistake there. I'm just going to back up. There we go. So what you end up having, and I'm going to zoom in here for a second. What we have here is kind of, I guess it's kind of like a diamond, sort of. That. You notice the center of the eye is right where those lines cross. You can draw a kind of a rounded shape that centers on that, which is the actual eye. Around it, though, wolves have these neat dark areas, kind of like at the front corner of your eye. There's like sort of a little fleshy bit there. Wolves have a lot of heavy pigmentation, so their eyes are surrounded by this beautiful rim of black skin. And that's kind of where the eye would be. You can even draw the pupil if you like. Mine is actually, yeah, that's better. Now it's above the lines, okay? That's where this eye is on our side. The right eye is just barely visible to us at this way, this angle of the head, the way this wolf is holding its head. And so you can actually put it in just above that X where the snout and the forehead joined. And this eye, we're seeing it at a very different angle, right? We're not seeing it face on. We're seeing it behind the curve of the head a little bit. So although the eyes face forward, like in many predators, so that they can overlap their fields of view for both eyes and their brain can reconstruct a three-dimensional image of their environment in front of them, the eyes, even though they are both face forward, they're located on a head that's curved, right? So we can only see a little bit of it. So what we're seeing here is this kind of a shape, very, very narrow. You can only see a tiny bit of the eye itself, which is that little bit of a curved center area. And those lines at the edges kind of more show us kind of the shape of the head curving in front of it. Okay? So that's all that you see from it, and that's normal. Sometimes we feel we have to draw the whole thing, the whole eye on both sides, but this is more accurate, actually. This is more correct if we're seeing the animal from sort of an interesting angle, not just from the side. That's what I like to do in my drawings, is to show some more of an interesting kind of a way of showing them. So there we go. That's the eye. And now we also need a mouth for the wolf, right? This mouth is closed on this wolf. You can also draw it open, but we're going to make this one closed because the vast majority of the time, animals have their mouths closed, except many kinds of fish, which actually require them for breathing, for respiring, basically. But most land animals usually have their mouths closed. And so I'm going to start, just going to pull this a little bit higher so you can see it a bit better. We're going to start at the sort of the bottom of the tip of the snout. Make this a little bit of a curved line. It goes like this. Back to just under the eye. And then at the very end, you see how it curves a little bit? The very end is a little bit of a thicker line. Like that. If you look at, for example, if you have a dog, and you look at your dog, there's this kind of, their lips kind of get a little bit wider a lot of the time at the back of the edge of their mouth. You can see it a little bit thicker there. And then these front areas are these flews, these heavier, thicker tissue that hangs over their teeth in the front to protect their teeth from drying out. So that's what these two sort of flaps are on the front. They're really adorable in doggies. And wolves have them too. And then, of course, on these flews, on these thicker, fleshy areas, we have whiskers. So we have little dots that we're going to draw where the whiskers emerge from. A few of them. And you can even draw a couple of whiskers like this. You don't have to draw too many. They're not like cats. They don't have that really gigantic whiskers, but they're pretty impressive. Those whiskers are useful because they sense things in the dark. They can feel what's near them. They don't have to see necessarily. And they also have a really, really effective snoot. Their snout, their nose is super, super sensitive to smells. So we're going to put that nose in place. And to do that, we're going to go again to the tip of the snout. You're going to draw sort of a light lightish line, dotted line even, that kind of surrounds the tip of the snout like that. And the front edge of the nose kind of has a ridge, a little bit of a rim. It's kind of a corner. And so you can kind of draw a dotted line coming from the very tip of the snout backward a little bit like this. That's the front edge of the snout. It's kind of a corner, right? Kind of a ledge. And then you need nostrils, right? For the air to enter and exit. And so on these guys, you can see both nostrils, but mostly you see the one near us. And so that comes from the bottom of the nose, kind of got a little bit of a darker spot like that. But also, is this flap, and I'm going to zoom in a little further even, now it's really big, that comes down like this. Okay? And you've seen that, if you've seen a dog's nose, you'll see that it's a pretty complex shape. There's the hole of the actual nostril, but then there's this like flap of the nose that comes down. And this helps to sort of guide the way that air goes in and out and makes it more effective for them to be able to smell. Now you can also see a little bit of the nostril on the other side because they have two nostrils, right? So all you need to do is draw a little line coming into the nose like that. And there's our nose. You can also, if you want to draw a bit of a ledge this side. That's all basically you need for the nose. Now the other thing is that we're going to draw this little dotted line, a little bit of a curved dotted line that goes from the nose and goes a wee bit upward and joins toward the eye. Not all the way to the eye, but toward it. Again, there's this bit of a ridge or a ledge on the side of their snout, like that. Now we've got the nose of the wolf in place. Now it's really starting to look more like a wolf, right? We need to just add some of the details of the paws now. And I'm going to actually speed up a little bit here because we don't want to go over time. The front paw is basically kind of like a bit like an oval almost, but it's got toes, right? It's got, you can see 4 of the toes here. So we're going to make sort of a little curves like this. And then there's lines that separate the toes. One of the toes, this one, is actually around the other side of the paw, so you can only see a little bit of it. And then the toes have claws on them, little claw shapes. And actually, the one that's further behind, you can't even see the claws on that one because it's hidden behind the next toe. There's actually a 5th toe and claw, but that's up here and on the or a little bit close, a little further down, but close to there, and is on the other side of the leg on the inside, so you can't actually see it from here. There needs to be a hind paw as well on the leg that's visible there. Similarly, we have these little bumps that become the toes, the line separating the toes, and then the little claws, not right along the lines, but on the tips of the toes each. There's another leg in the front, of course. The wolves don't have 2 legs, they have 4. So this one on the front leg is actually sort of mostly hiding behind the left leg. The right leg's hiding mostly behind the left leg. And all we can see here is the back of the paw, which starts about here. So I'm just going to point to where it is. It starts there. It's a little bit of a line that comes just out from the back of the leg, goes up like that. Most of it is hidden behind the left leg. And then at the front end of that, there's a couple of toes that are visible. Again, most of it is hidden behind the front of the left leg, but you can see these toes and the line between the toes and the claws on those. They can't retract their claws like cats can, right? These claws are always out, and they're really effective for, especially on the slippery surfaces of these watery environments where they live on the shores. If you ever tried to walk on these kelp and algae covered rocks, really, really slippery. So it's good for them to have claws to be able to get a good purchase on these slippery rocks. There's another leg, of course, in the back, the right leg. And this leg is actually more visible. So you're going to do a very similar line to what you did for the right leg, but just a little bit in front of it, like that. And then the paw, similar to what you did for the other paw. Again, little bulges for the toes, the lines separating the toes, and the claws on those ones that are visible. That's actually only 3 of them are visible here because there's a 4th one, wolves have 4 toes on their hind feet, and 5 on their front. The 5th one in the front is not visible in any of these. Some dogs have a 5th hind toe as well. Our Tycho, he does, but not all dogs do. The ancestral, the more ancient condition in wolves is 4 toes in the hind leg. Okay? So the next thing, I'm not going to actually put this in detail, the markings, but I'll show you what there are. I'm actually going to remove the guides that we drew because that is not going to be necessary for this. Okay, I'm going to show you what the markings look like here. There are actually, let's do it over this way. There are 2 sets of markings. Many wolves have these dark colored fur in certain parts of their body. They have these sort of like little like spectacle shapes, like glasses around their eyes. And then they've got this really neat little dark line coming down in front of their ears. They've got sort of a dark kind of like a bib on their neck. And then the back is much darker than the belly. And that's important because this is something that we call counter shading. Means that the animal is darker on the part of its body, the top, where the sun hits. And when the sun makes a shadow on the underside of the animal, that part is normally darker if it was all one color. But since the wolf is lighter underneath in color, that means that the shadow is sort of canceled out. And so that makes the wolf more stealthy. It can sneak up on prey easier. It can hide more easily if it's hiding its own shadow with light color underneath. So that's a really neat thing that many animals actually use for hunting and for hiding from their predators. The other thing about the coastal wolf, and this is another way in which they differ from most other wolves in the area, is that they have a lot more of this, as I mentioned before, these rust-colored patches of fur. And you see them a lot on the legs. So the front leg and the back leg, you can see I've got these sort of rusty-colored lines drawn in. You can color this with, felt pens or colored pencils or whatever as well, and that you can make this into a coloring sheet. And there's also some rusty colors on their snout coming down from their eyes and the top of their snout and then the top of their head and their ears. And so these colors, again, help them to blend in really nicely with their environment. In their environment, I'm just going to draw this pretty quickly here just as we finish up. This wolf is standing on some rocks. So I'm going to draw these rocks, outline of the rocks under it. This. I'm actually also going to remove that 2/3, 1/3 line there just so it's out of the way. Okay, so it makes it easier for us to see. There's the rocks under it. On these rocks, we have, as I mentioned, that kind of kelp. These kelp are really neat because you can see the shape I'm making is these little branches. They're sort of olive green color, but they can turn brownish. They're these really neat little, it's really, really interesting looking. They have these bulges, these branch bulges at the tips of these, what they're called thalli. They're not really branches. They're not really leaves. Each of these is kind of a thallus, it's called. They're not plants. They're not even closely related to plants. These are brown algae. They're a really neat example of how life can evolve into from so many different lineages to perform similar functions. These are photosynthetic. They use sunlight to generate food just like plants do. They're not plants, and they live mostly underwater. But these ones, this is called fucus. It also, spelled like this, it also tolerates some time being in the air during low tide, for example. And the wolves kind of hunt around in these piles of fucus to look for clams and other kinds of shellfish and so on, and other kind of life forms that make a part of their meals. You can also see some water. This wolf is sort of wading in the water. So here's the water line, right on the front leg here. There's where the water line is. On the back leg, the water line, the edge of the water is right at the edge of its toes like this. And if you want, you can put little ripples around where those lines are, because where the wolf's legs meet the water, and because the wolf is moving, it causes the water to kind of ripple a bit, right? Just like when you step into a puddle or into the ocean, you have these ripply waves spread out. There you go. And what's the wolf looking at? Well, we have a salmon here because this wolf feeds on salmon as a large part of its meal. Up to 85% of its meal. I'm going to draw this quickly here. Can be salmon and seals and beavers as well, actually. And other things like, for example, the shellfish like clams and mussels that I mentioned before. This here is one salmon. They typically take them when salmon come close to the shore, like at spawning season. Right now, actually, from about July through October, there's different kinds of salmon on our shores here in BC, and different ones spawn. They return to their home rivers to lay eggs at different times of the year, but mostly a lot of them are spawning right now. And so they're coming up the river. So these wolves are now looking for these fish, along with the bears as well, which hunt fish a lot, right? So a lot of the grizzly bears, for example, will hunt fish, and you see beautiful photos of them hunting fish along these rapids when the fish are trying to get up to their home streams to lay eggs. And so the neat thing about these wolves, actually, one more thing about them is when they eat the fish, they eat usually only the brain. Why would that be? The brain and the head. Why would that be? There's this wonderful meat. Well, fish, salmon often have parasites. They have like worms, tapeworms growing in them. And those can be, if the wolf eats those, that can infect the wolf. And there are other parasites in the fish sometimes as well. This is natural, as long as there's not too much parasites. But if the wolf eats those, they can get the parasites, and that can make them sick. They can get what's called salmon poisoning. But if they avoid the parts of the fish, the meaty rest of the part where these parasites usually live, and only eat the head and the brain, they can avoid actually getting sick from the fish this way. So these coastal wolves have found a way to eat parts of the fish that keep them healthier. It's amazing. And the rest of the fish, they kind of scatter around the forest, and those fish bodies decompose, and all of the nutrients from them then get absorbed into the forest and are turned into wonderful biomass for the trees, which support the wolves and all of the other life forms that exist there. So as we finish up, I'm going to add the trees in the background here. We have kind of a forest in the background. This is the Great Bear Rainforest where a lot of these wolves live. They live all the way from southern BC and south even a little bit up to southeastern Alaska along the shore. These wonderful coastal wolves. And along these shores, there are these amazing, amazing, dense, ancient rainforests that are up to 2,000 years old for some of the trees. It's spectacular. And we need to preserve these ancient forests, especially the older ones, for them to be able to survive better, and for many other many other kinds of beings as well to live. Many kinds of life cannot live well in young forests. So we can't just go and cut all the forests down and then replant them, because they need the old trees, which will take hundreds or thousands of years to get to the age where they can support these beautiful beings successfully. We don't want them to die out. So let's write letters to people who make laws here, for example, to those policymakers, asking them to make responsible laws that keep our activities from harming these lands too much. And so we can share the land with these beautiful beings, and all of us can survive for thousands more years. That's the goal. Then we can have this wonderful world in which we and our children can enjoy the beautiful life forms that we see today and not have them just being memories. So let's do what we can that way, and then we can see these coastal wolves for many, many millennia to come. So here we go. There's our picture, basically, of a coastal wolf. You can color it in afterwards. You can even use it to send along pictures with your letters to policymakers, and maybe it's harder for them to throw away letters if they come with a nice picture from you. Anything you can do, be creative, and spread the word to your friends, to your family, everybody, about how amazing these beings are and what we can all do to help. And so with that, I'm going to hand it back to you, Makwala and Maya, and then we can wrap this up as you like. And I don't know if we have any questions or not, but yeah, that's my side of it there.
Again, amazing session talking to you. Just getting into the kind of nerdy science stuff
Yeah.
and the
Yeah.
cultural stuff, and
Yep.
of course the beautiful artwork as
Thank you.
always. And again, yeah, it's really nice to see the forest in the background, the salmon in the river. I'm assuming it's the river, and that interconnectedness that it all is, right? Because the wolf's going to go and eat the salmon, then it's going to go into the forest
Yep.
and scat, and then that's going to go into the soil, and that's going to feed the trees.
Absolutely.
It's a beautiful little circle of life thing going on there.
And the neat thing too about how some of this information has been obtained, it's another good example of how sort of traditional scientific methods in ecology, the study of how beings interact with each other in their environment, how that kind of typical science is combined with a more sustainable way that First Nations have of studying as well. Much of this research that has gone into finding out about these coastal wolves recently was done in a way that avoids invasive methods that bother the wolves too much. So they weren't allowed to tag the wolves or capture them. Because sometimes what we do in scientific studies is we have to catch an animal, as carefully and gently as possible, and then put a tag on it so that when we can, see it again, we can recognize the individual animal because it's marked with either a number or a certain radio frequency that is emitted, so you can actually learn about where that animal is. But that was not permitted when studying some of these wolves, because you don't want to tag your family or capture your family and subject them to these kinds of invasive techniques sometimes. So it was an interesting combination of two things where they had to use, as you mentioned, studies of the scat, the droppings of these animals to learn about the genes that they possess. They will shed parts of their cells from their intestines and their guts and so on, their stomach, into the droppings, and they can extract that information, that genetic information in DNA, and learn about the individual animals that left those particular bits of scat, and learn where they go and what they're eating and when. So it's a nice merger of two forms of information gathering that minimized the amount of interference with the wolves and still gave us useful information.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, amazing what science can do. DNA and
we can
everything.
adapt.
Yeah,
So,
we can adapt. So there's a thank you from anonymous attendee. They said fantastic session. M. Maninen said thank you from Champlain Heights.
nice.
And Lori Ankenman was asking if the coastal wolves are on the endangered species list. And I think we're talking a little bit about that earlier, but might have grazed over it a little bit. They're not.
Right.
But yeah, as we're talking about the habitat with the logging,
Yep.
Lack of fish.
Yep.
For those who aren't too savvy with that, we've had a bad few fish runs. This was the first
Right.
good one in quite a few years.
Wow.
And I don't think it's any coincidence that it's after we got a majority of the fish farms out of the Broughton Archipelago.
Good point. That's the other thing. Those open pen fish farms generate an enormous number of parasites on the fish and diseases that spreads to the wild fish populations, right? And so now, of course, you have huge stress, disease stress that all these fish are experiencing from these few sources of disease. And yeah, you're right. There was this recent, if you can say anything about how that development has been.
How did that develop? Well,
or what's news?
People, we or a lot of indigenous peoples were saying, no, this is affecting the fish farms, and it took two different approaches. The bans and everything, going to the government and taking it to them, and working with scientists. As well as an actual occupation on a couple different fish farms at Midsummer Island, and I forget the other one right now, but those were on some from our Numkees territories, and so yeah, it was just being vocal and
Nice.
doing the right thing, and a lot of sacrifices, but that's eventually pressured the government to remove a majority of the fish farms. There are still a few.
Yeah, but big success, big progress that way, and I greatly admire people that do this kind of effort. We need to protect these lands in so many ways, and that's another way we can do to eliminate sources of danger. These many of these fish farms are not managed well, and you have huge amounts of disease. So anyway, yeah, these are not protected. They are not on the endangered species list because they haven't been recognized as distinct enough a population yet. But future efforts to describe them scientifically as a very distinct, genetically distinct population could change that. If they get that status, then it's easier to deal with the individual population and put an endangered status on that, for example, or whatever it ends up being. That way they can get better protection. So yeah, there's still work to be done for sure. Lots.
Mm-hmm. And the first step in that is educating people and doing it in a nice and fun way, as we have today, I think. So hopefully, I think with that, halakasla, thank you again for another great session. Halakasla to all the schools and all the people out there who tuned in. I think we'll call this a wrap.
Yeah, I thank you so much, everybody who participated. It's always a great pleasure to do these, and I just love to see. Oh, and are you guys still doing the if people send in their pictures to post them on a gallery? I'm not sure because you did that on previous ones. That'd be really neat to see people's pictures.
Yeah, I think I saw Maya post somewhere saying that. So okay, yeah, definitely send in your pictures, and we'll do what we do with them.
I think we'll post some information as well later about where you can get more information about these coastal wolves. Some really neat sites, for example. So, so thank you so much, everybody.